Well, welcome to the 12th virtual meeting of the Rotary Club of Park Cities. I'm the President Richard Stanford, joined by our Vice President, Happy Franklin. This is going to be a great program. Tracy Walder and the CIA and the FBI, this is going to be so much fun. Welcome to the... I think we need to also remember that this is Juneteenth. Juneteenth, for we who are Texans, is really an important day. If this ever becomes a national holiday, and it's certainly become more popular around this country, we will remind everybody that Juneteenth happened in Galveston on June 19th, 1865, when General Granger let the African Americans in Texas know that they had been freed. They'd been freed since the Emancipation Proclamation, they just didn't know it. But that's a particularly Texas thing, so we need to remember that on Juneteenth. And we're also going to talk in a minute about the wonderful stuff we have upcoming for the 4th of July. We couldn't have a parade, but we have all kinds of fun alternatives. We'll talk about that later. But before we start the program, join me, would you bow your heads and let's join in the invocation. It will be followed by the national anthem. Father, it's a hard time to know what's right for ourselves, for our neighbors. We've been loosed to go out again with restrictions. But help us, since there's a lot of personal discretion involved, help us to learn how it is to make ourselves safe and make those around us safe under these circumstances. It's really kind of up to us, and we ask for that guidance. We certainly ask for help in being productive and living fulfilled lives in a time that's kind of a new normal, and we're learning how to try to adjust to that. So be with us with that and help us to live life to the fullest, even at a time when we're not sure how to do that sometimes. We particularly pray for those who are without jobs. This is a point in our history that there are so many people who suffer from joblessness. We know and hope that will change, but be with those. It's a tough time for them. And help us all to be hopeful. We know you're in charge of all things, and we know you make all things good ultimately. Help us through this to remember that and to be hopeful and joyful people. We pray all of that in your name. Amen. Now, I do have a special person that you should pray for, and that is Pam Carvey. Pam's mother died in her sleep a night or two ago now. She was living in Illinois. She was a great age. She was 97. And Pam asked us to remember that she had actually worked right up to age 80 as a realtor. And so she lived a full and productive life, but it's a great loss for Pam. So pray for her and remember her and let her know you're thinking about her. Now our national anthem.
Today's PCR Marketplace advertiser is Richard Stanford and Highland Park United Methodist Church. Highland Park United Methodist Church is one of the 3 largest churches in its denomination, with a membership of 17,000, and is located on the SMU campus at Mockingbird and Bishop. It has satellite congregations at Munger Place Church in East Dallas and the Grove in North Dallas. Within the next year, Highland Park will begin a new worshiping congregation at the House of Blues in the downtown Dallas area. Together with strong programs for youth, children, and families, the church offers an array of programs to enrich and disciple people of all ages. It also provides the Wesley House, a community for college students on the SMU campus. A unique feature of its main campus are the multiple forms of worship offered every Sunday: high church, contemporary, traditional, a teaching service, and youth worship at the Tollison Family Activity Center. Its outreach supports dozens of nonprofits and projects benefiting the community. It has become the world's largest habitat provider, and it operates both an orphanage in Costa Rica and an eye clinic in Haiti. During the last 90 days of the COVID pandemic, Highland Park United Methodist Church has provided over 2,000 meals per day to people in need. That is really impressive. Highland Park United Methodist Church is a place to find community and to grow in faith and service. Thank you, Richard and Highland Park United Methodist Church, for being this week's PCR Marketplace Advertiser.
Thank you. Now we need to do some announcements, some of them really interesting. We couldn't have our parade. Turns out that was a very great decision with the way things have been spiking. So nevertheless, people look forward to something fun and patriotic on that day. And so let me read what the chair of the parade team, Sarah Ollier, has told me is going to be happening. And you can be part of that in terms of volunteering for judging and for sponsoring. Our yard block competition, 13 entries have been submitted for the yard competition. So we're going to be judging 13 yards for their designs. 6 whole blocks have entered as blocks. Judging will be in the afternoon of July 3rd. Email Dustin Burns if you want to help judge the decorated yards and blocks. I'm going to be a judge. This is going to be so much fun. The Kids Patriotic Art Competition forms are due June 25, so we're still waiting on all of those. We're also seeking judges for the kids' art. Email Dustin if you're interested in judging that. We have 3 high school teams competing for the Spirit of Service Award, which is a fundraiser for the North Texas Food Bank. The Lady Scots track field cross-country team is having a relay marathon this Saturday around the Park Cities. The men's basketball team is having a free throw 3-point shoot-a-thon seeking sponsors. And the boys baseball team is having a home run derby. Email Sarah Ollier if you are interested in supporting any of these teams and their fundraisers. So you can judge, you can sponsor. It's going to be a great time leading up to the 4th of July. And remember Maggiano's. We have voted as a board to return to Maggiano's for our first in-person meeting on July 10th, noon on Friday. And that will be our installation also. And so get ready. There are going to be some protocols, and you're probably going to have to register. We need to make sure that we've got everything under control, but we're ready to get together again. So in the interim, continue, as I have, to support Maggiano's by doing takeout or eating individually there. And I have said this so many times, we have been so proud of the work of the North Texas Food Bank in this community. We actually had a huge fundraising campaign several years ago, raised money for one of their trucks. So we have a truck that we've sponsored. And we've been watching that over the past few weeks as thousands and thousands of people have been fed through the North Texas Food Bank. It's great work that the Chief Executive Officer, Trish Cunningham, a member of our club, has coordinated. It's one of the great national efforts, and we're proud of that. I actually did this yesterday myself. Several of us have been doing this. It's so much fun. Our partner, Agape Clinic, they have hard work to do right now. They're open, but we help them by serving lunch on Thursdays. We take it over, we pick it up, we take it over, and they don't have to leave the building. And so it's satisfying work, and it's really fun to see what's going on over there. So if you are so inclined, you can either fund lunches or you can deliver them, or both. Contact Fred Brown to get in line to do that. I testify it's really fulfilling. And in all of this, of course, the great work of Rotary around the world goes on through Rotary International and through our own foundation. And we'll be talking more as we get back in person about our ABC project, Agape Bonton Clinic, bringing the Agape Clinic to the Bonton community. We've raised around $100,000 so far, to going to go upward to $150,000. And we're going to make sure that Bonton is served medically as it's served in so many other ways. So support our foundation. Anything you give now will go to that project that you give to our foundation, unless you say otherwise. And of course, with Rotary International, the work goes on with polio eradication and all the things that Rotary International continues to do around the world. We have a lot of Paul Harris fellows. We have a lot of people that give to the Rotary Foundation. Just don't forget to continue doing that during this period. And let us know. Jeff Sheehan's email is on your slide. Let Jeff know if you've got a good program you want to suggest. We'll be working on some programming in the fall, so let us know if you have someone that you really want to have. And last week we had the Hillcrest High School Interact Scholarship speakers. Continue to pray for our interactors at Highland Park United Methodist Church, our young folks who are part of Rotary Interact at high school.
I am so thrilled to introduce Tracy Walder. She's going to be an incredible speaker for us today. From 2000 to 2004, Tracy Walder worked as a staff operations officer at the CIA's Counterterrorism Center Weapons of Mass Destruction Group, and later as a special agent for the FBI. During her time with the CIA, Tracy traveled to war zones and many countries. Tracy received many awards for her service from both the CIA and from foreign intelligence offices, including the Counterterrorism Medal and multiple Exceptional Performance Awards. After leaving the CIA, Tracy became a special agent at the FBI's Los Angeles field office, specializing in Chinese counterintelligence operations. Following her time at the CIA and FBI, Tracy enrolled in both a master's and a teaching credentialing program. She taught history and a self-created course on national security and foreign policy for over a decade. Tracy now works as an author, adjunct professor of criminal justice at TCU, and sits on the board of directors for Girls Security, a nonpartisan organization increasing the representation of women in national security by building a pipeline for girls and young women through learning, training, and mentoring support. She has appeared on Good Morning America and Fox News and has written national security pieces for Salon, the New York Post, the Huffington Post, and other publications. Tracy Walder earned her degree in history from USC and her master's in education from Chapman University in Orange, California. She has since moved to Texas. She's been here 10 years. She has a beautiful 5-year-old daughter and is happily married. She's in Highland Park, and she is a prospective member of our club. Tracy is the author of The Unexpected Spy, My Secret Life, Chasing Down Some of the World's Most Notorious Terrorists, which was an audiobook bestseller. Additionally, the ABC network is working in conjunction with Calamity Jane and Timberman Beverly Production Companies to create a TV series based on her book. So stay tuned. Let's welcome Tracy Walder. She's going to give us a great program.
Thank you so much for having me, Happy. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. So I first wanted to actually start out with why I wrote the book. That's a question I get a lot. I decided to not write the book immediately upon leaving the CIA and the FBI. I think I needed time to figure out what I wanted, figure out what career I wanted. So for me, the turning point came actually when I had a daughter, and I knew that I wanted a way to tell her about my past and to tell her about my life. And it really sort of pulled on my heartstrings when my husband proposed to me the idea of writing our book, really for the sole purposes of our daughter. So that's really what pushed me over the edge to write my book. So I guess I should start at the beginning. A lot of people want to know why I got into the CIA and the FBI. I think that's a very normal question. For me, I actually always wanted to be a high school history teacher. That's how I started out my life. I really took an interest in history early on. My dad is a huge history buff. But I also sort of had this idea of of service in my family. My great-grandparents were veterans, my grandparents were veterans, and my father and my uncle are both veterans. So I think that had also been ingrained in me as well. And my parents, instead of, much to my chagrin, kind of growing up, we didn't get presents. We had experiences. My parents took us overseas and wanted us to experience different cultures, different people. And I think, when you're 12, you don't appreciate that. But now I understand, and I really do appreciate that. So I had this early interest in history, but I also had an interest in sort of the world, geography, culture. So I went to USC, and I majored in history there. But during my experiences at USC, I had some really amazing professors. And there was one class I was actually struggling in, which was my Intro to Economics class when I was a freshman. And my professor, he was wonderful and was helping me sort of with the logistics of the class, but he also sort of talked to me about different applications of my degree. History teacher is great, but there's other things you can do too. So I actually started interning at local museums in LA. I interned in politics in Washington, D.C. And in about 1997, I was sitting in my room in my sorority house, and I saw a person on TV, and his name was Osama bin Laden. And that was sort of that notorious interview that Peter Bergen and Peter Arnett had done of Osama bin Laden in the caves of Afghanistan. And I think my interest was really peaked sort of at that point. But I didn't know how to work in terrorism. I didn't know. And we have to remember this is the late 90s. So, the geopolitical climate was very, very different. Terrorism really wasn't at the top of mind for a lot of folks. So one day, I decided to go to a career fair at USC. I had my resume on me, and there was a table, and it said CIA. And I remember my recruiter, and I said, I'm just a history major. I don't really know that this is the right place for me. And he said, it's the right place for everyone. There is a place here for everyone. And so I gave him my resume, and I truly did not think that they would call back, and they did. About 3 weeks later, I received a phone call. I went for kind of a large, I don't want to say cattle call, but large interview at a local hotel. And then from there, is sort of you pass certain part of the process. So I went to, they sent me to Virginia for a very arduous polygraph experience, psychological testing, academic testing, physical testing, all of that. And then once you pass that, you start the background check. So I cleared through everything fall of my senior year. So I had a conditional offer of employment from them my senior year of college. It was contingent upon my graduation. And once I graduated, I went straight to Washington, D.C. I'd really never lived anywhere else other than California. So that was a very sort of new experience for me. I began work. I guess I got lucky, but at that time, we have to remember different climates. Most of the very experienced sort of tenured employees were working in sort of the Russia group or the Latin American Affairs Group. The Counterterrorism Center was a rather new center, and the concepts of centers at the CIA were really, really new. They were exploring transnational issues. So I was placed in the Counterterrorism Center on the operations side. So a lot of people always ask, oh, well, isn't that side the best side? And there's really no best side. I was actually way underqualified to be an analyst. Analysts mostly have PhDs, things like that, in those particular fields of study. So that wasn't going to be the right place for me. I wasn't in technology. I wasn't an engineer, a science major. So that was really more the kind of all-encompassing liberal studies area. And I began looking at terrorist training camps, as one does. I was familiarizing myself with the areas, the territory, the people coming in and out, those kinds of things. And that's what I was doing on the day of September 11th. I had been at the agency for about a year, a little bit more than a year at that point. And September 11th struck. And just to back up a few days before September 11th, I was selected by my boss to participate in a very classified program that really, I think only about 4 or 5 of us were selected for that. And I was the only female. And, I remember being briefed on the program, and I sort of had, I don't want to say moral issues, but it was unlike anything I had done before, really prepared myself for. And I remember saying, are we going to have to use this, to my boss? And he said, no, not unless there's a really large terrorist attack. And obviously we know September 11th happened a few days after. And that is a chapter in my book that I was very surprised that the CIA allowed in. It's really not in any of the other books that I've read. So I was very surprised that they allowed that in. And I began working really a day after September 11th on that particular program. Can't go into too many specifics about the program. The CIA did redact certain portions of my book. But I can say that it took place in Afghanistan, and I was on duty the night that we were looking for Osama bin Laden in Tora Bora. And so it was a pretty heart-wrenching experience, thinking we had him and then losing him all in that same time. So I rotated off that program. They only allowed us to be on it for a few months at a time because it was quite draining. We were working 20-hour days. And I was sent to work into the Counterterrorism Center's Weapons of Mass Destruction group. So one of the things, the biggest thing we were looking for there, I think when we think of weapons of mass destruction, we think of only nukes. But there's lots of different ways to destroy species and people. And the section I worked on was crude toxins and poisons. So we were looking at Al-Qaeda's capability to acquire crude toxins and poisons. And the individual I was in charge of, who now I think his name is synonymous with ISIS. He was the founder of ISIS, but at the time we didn't know him as that. His name was Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. He's since been killed. He was killed in a drone strike, I believe, in 2006. But he was very much alive at that time. We had found the Al-Qaeda manual in a house in England, and there were quite a few chapters on them trying to procure these weapons. So we figured, we needed to take a look at this. And in tracking those weapons, kind of took me all over the world, the Middle East, to Africa, and to Europe, kind of trying to thwart attacks, but also trying to gain information about when the next attacks would be through either, human assets, technological assets and other intelligence services. I talk about 2 attacks that we were able to stop. I wasn't allowed to be specific in my book, but obviously that felt really good to be able to do that. It wasn't for our country, it was for another country, but it felt really great to be able to serve in that way. It was also very frustrating at times. I think in my book, I talk about how we had a known terrorist who had some known material on him that was going to be transiting through a European country on a Sunday. And, we worked, Monday through Friday, but if we had something that was going on, we came into work on the weekends, obviously. And this intelligence service wrote back and said, we are so sorry, but we don't do surveillance on Sundays, so we're not going to be able to track him for you. And I remember sort of wanting to throw my computer out the window at that point because we lost him and we never found him again. And he was partially responsible for some bombings in Madrid of some trains there in 2004, which was a very frustrating experience. So I tracked weapons of mass destruction. It took sort of a different tone later because, again, I was doing crude toxins and poisons. Just to back up, they do send you to something called poison school, which I outline in my book, and you sort of look at how these are acquired, how easy they are to make, and how cheap they are, because you need to become familiar with what you're doing. You need kind of on-the-job training. Also, CIA operates a little bit differently than I think what we're used to seeing amongst pop culture. When you train at the farm, your training at the farm doesn't start sort of right away. At the FBI it does, but not at the CIA. But unfortunately, because September 11th happened, our training occurred in more of a piecemeal fashion. They couldn't afford to let their operatives be gone for 5 months. And so I would have training, 3 weeks here, 2 weeks there, 1 month there. And I guess some of the highlights, one of the more fun opportunities was something called a crash and bang course. And so that was a 2.5, 3 week course in which you're at the farm and you learn how to crash your car, detect vehicle surveillance, detect hostile checkpoints, those kinds of things. And that was a really fun experience. You learn the pit maneuvers, different kinds of things to get out of really difficult situations. And I think one of the things they're trying to show you is if you crash your car, you'll be okay. And I think it's kind of train that out of you, the situational awareness. So that was one of the more fun highlights. Obviously had weapons training and those kinds of things, but that was one of the more unusual things. You also do foot surveillance in the city, those kinds of things. That was all, it was fun for me. It was very interesting. I did participate. Part of what you do is, depending on what group you're in, you rotate to different war zones. I'm not able to say which war zones I was in. The CIA wouldn't let me. But I think given the time period and kind of the midst of a specific war on terror that we were in, you could probably gather where I was. But when I was there, you rotate in the different offices. So it was my office's time to go, which means what you get to do is participate in enhanced interrogations or debriefings, and I know that those are controversial, and I do talk about those in my book, but I was the person sent from my office, and they do that, the different offices within the Counterterrorism Center, so you have a chance to ask the high-value terrorist about your particular area of work. And so, I was in that war zone for about 3 or 4 months, and getting information from those terrorists, and that's really all I can say, unfortunately, about that particular portion. After, I decided, I was at the CIA for about 4 years. I traveled all over the world, and I think a turning point came for me when I was in a North African country, and I was talking with another operative's wife, and they were stationed there, so they had been living there for about a year, maybe 2. And she talked about how she felt like she was never going to have a life, but like kind of the nuclear life that she wanted. And at the ripe old age of 26 or 25, I started thinking about what I wanted 10 years down the line. And I think I realized that that was not going to be possible at an organization like the CIA. And so I made a decision which was hard. A lot of people think I left the agency under bad terms, things like that. I left under probably at the peak of my career. I had won awards. I still talk with my colleagues almost every day. They were bridesmaids in my wedding. I cried the day that I left, but I left because I knew that overseas component was something that was never going to change about the agency. It's who they are, and that's okay, but it was never going to change. And I really wanted to still work the counterterrorism mission, but to perhaps do that stateside. And I knew just in working in the Counterterrorism Center, you do work with FBI agents who are detailed to your group. And so I knew that there was a counterterrorism contingent within the FBI. So I applied to the FBI and I was accepted, and I began my training at Quantico right after I left. There was no kind of gap in my employment. So right after I left the CIA. My experiences at CIA and FBI were vastly different. We have to remember they're 2 different organizations. The CIA is an intelligence collecting organization, period. That is their tasking. The FBI is a law enforcement organization, so their job is to enforce the law. That's not good, that's not bad, they're just different. And I think I was naive and didn't understand that they were coming from kind of 2 different places. And so for me, I started at the academy. I was very hopeful, very, very excited to be there. I passed the PT test, all of that. Really from day one, I was by a good 7 years the youngest person in my class, and I was also only one of 6 women. Which I was pretty used to at the CIA being the only woman. I never had any negative experiences about that. But unfortunately, I sort of rebuffed the advances of one of the males in my class, and so he decided to start a rumor that I had never worked at the CIA and had lied about it, which was fascinating to me because the FBI had to come to the CIA to do my background checks. And so that just kept going, and it kept following me. And, my mom read my book, and she couldn't believe that I didn't just, leave the academy because of all of the things that had happened to me there, which I detail a lot of them very specifically in my book, but I'll give you one sort of tidbit of something that happened during my training. You get practice, hands-on practice in interviewing suspects, interviewing victims, those kinds of things, which is great training to have. You don't wear your uniform. At the FBI Academy, we wear a uniform, which is kind of these tactical khaki pants and like a navy blue polo shirt. They want you to wear a suit, so you get used to the idea of being professional when you're doing that. And so I wore a suit that I had worn many times. I had briefed Tenet. I worked with Tenet extensively when I was working that very classified program. I really thought nothing about the suit that I had on, and I did my interview with, you have like a teacher for each section, did my interview, my feedback was good. One of my trainers came to me and said I needed to write a letter of apology to that teacher that I had because I made him uncomfortable in my suit. I did write that letter of apology. Part of me thinks that maybe I shouldn't have, but I did. And I have different versions of it that I go into in my book. So that was just one thing that happened to me at the academy. But, as much as they tried to, I guess, push me out, I passed my weapons qualifications. I passed all the tests. I passed everything. And I kept sort of thinking to myself, this will end when I get detailed to my office, that I just need to get past these next 4.5, 5 months, and this will end when I get, detailed to my next office. I think why it didn't end in the academy was because the kind of head of the academy went along with it, never told anyone to stop. And I think had he done that, I think it really would have changed a lot of things. It was just not the best leadership, I guess. And so I was also, the office and case that I was assigned didn't really help my cause. I was assigned to the LA field office. Most brand new agents are sent to large field offices. There's something called resident agencies, which are very small agencies that more seasoned FBI officers are sent to just because they're smaller and they need their expertise. But I was sent from the academy into a resident agency, and that really upset a lot of the older people in my class, which I didn't choose that. That's where I was sent. And I was sent to work Chinese counterintelligence. And that was because they needed my security clearance to work that. So I was sent to my office. It was the Orange County Resident Agency in LA. And I thought, oh, this will be much better. Well, unfortunately, people talked and told people in my office everything that had sort of happened at the academy. So I think I sort of already had, I don't want to say a bias against me, but I did. And I struggled with whether to put all of this in my book, but I think it was the right thing to put it in, just because everyone needs to hear about everyone's lived experiences, good or bad. And so I worked a case that was in the New Yorker, and it was on CNN. It was called the Tai and Shimak case. And what the two of them were doing is both had been in the U.S. for about 20 years, maybe a little less than that. And they became naturalized citizens. They were here for so long, and they were stealing our nuclear cloaking technology for submarines, which would basically make them invisible to radars. And they were sending all that information back to China. So this was, a rather early documented case of economic espionage and security espionage by the Chinese, which we're sort of seeing today. It really hasn't ended, and it was really fun to be on a case that I guess became so big. But I enjoyed everything I got to do. Dumpster diving is one that I talk about in my book, which I know this sounds gross, but I really enjoyed it. You put on kind of a full hazmat suit, and your trash is public property once it's on your sidewalk. And so they would collect the trash in a couple block radius, bring it back to the waste management facility, and I would jump on in the back and look for their trash. And that's actually ultimately how they were caught. but you'll have to read my book to find out the specifics. But they were caught by their trash, which was pretty interesting. Unfortunately, though, sort of the gender harassment and sexual harassment continued. It became worse and worse. I just couldn't take it anymore. So I filed a complaint, actually, and then I left. And I decided now is as good a time as ever to finally be a teacher. I'd like to say that treatment of women has changed, but about a year ago, a group of 17 women reached out to me. They ended up being in the New York Times, that they have filed a gender discrimination lawsuit against the FBI. So I don't know that too much has changed, and that's part of why I kept it in my book, was to them, that we need to change this this treatment. So I went and got my master's in education. My goal was to become a history teacher at the high school that I went to, and I did for about 2 years. But then we moved to Texas, and I taught high school here, and I created a course on national security because I think we need to change the gender dynamic in it. I think. And that's not to say that men's voices aren't valuable in it. They absolutely are, and they need to be in it. But women only represent about 17 to 20% of people in national security, and we bring a whole set of different eyes to it. I read a very recent article. The head of Mossad, which is Israel's CIA, was talking about sort of why females sometimes make better spies, and sort of the differences that we have in terms of listening, in terms of empathy, in terms of just being able to read people. So I thought that was very interesting. And a lot of my students have gone into national security careers, whether it's on the law side, whether it's actually like in the Department of Homeland Security. It's been really, really neat to see. And then I will be teaching intro to criminal justice and women in criminal justice at TCU, which I'm really excited about as well. There's not too many females that are ex-law enforcement that are doing that. So I think it'll be good for students to sort of see that both genders can participate. But I would really love, if you're interested in my story, to please buy my book. It's called The Unexpected Spy, and it is available via audio download. But if you're local to Dallas, it'd be great if you could buy it from Interabang, because they're sort of our local bookstore that I like to support. But it's also available at Target and Barnes and Noble and Amazon. So if there's any questions that y'all want me to answer, I'm happy to.
Oh, that's fantastic. So if you had to do it all over again, would you apply with the CIA and or FBI?
So that's a really great question, Abby. Yes, I would. But I think with the FBI, I would have had my eyes open larger. I think I was very young and I was very naive, and I assumed things were so great at one place it would just be exactly the same as the other. And in one way, naivete is good, but in the other way, it's kind of not, in that you're not necessarily approaching things with sort of that 360 view of it. So I think there's some amazing people at the FBI, and the FBI is doing some amazing work, and I would absolutely do it again.
So would you consider other law enforcement agencies as well?
Yes and no. I think it depends. It depends on what the issue is, and it depends on what the law enforcement agency is, I think.
So in your book is available on Amazon?
Amazon, Interabang, Target, Barnes & Noble.
How did you meet your husband?
I met my husband. It's so funny. I met him 2 weeks after I left the FBI at a party in LA because I was back in California getting my master's. And he was at a house party of a mutual friend that we had. And he was in dental school actually at UCLA. So he went to my rival college.
So is he a dentist?
He's an orthodontist here in
Awesome.
Dallas. Yes.
Fantastic. So would you have done anything differently to help make your situation better with the FBI or the CIA? If you, looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently?
At the
Or that
CIA,
you could have done differently?
At the CIA, no. Because the reason I left is really why they exist, right? They're not going to change, and I don't want them to change. At the FBI, I think I wish I would have fought more. I filed a complaint and then I left. And I think I wish I would have stayed and fought, but I don't know. I think it had gone on for so long, I was maybe just tired at that point. And I think when I had been approached by those women who were filing that lawsuit, I became very devastated because I think in a way I felt I didn't do enough to keep, I know that sounds, it's not all me, I get that, but, I think I felt like I should have done more to help them, and I didn't. So that's probably something I would have done differently.
And you wrote a book.
Yes.
So that did, continues to do great work.
Yes.
So what was your book writing process, and will you write another book?
Sure, that's a great question too, that I didn't really clarify. So in my book, when you leave the CIA, you sign an NDA or non-disclosure agreement, just that if you ever publish anything, you will send it through to something called the Publications Review Board. And then all they do, they're not, violating your freedom of speech or anything like that, but they make sure that there's no classified information in there or, stuff that's sensitive to national security. So what they did, I saw somebody had wrote, she published it with redactions. That's so lazy. And just so people know, I had to do 5 rewrites to get it to the redaction point that it's at now, because they had redacted entire chapters.
Wow.
And they don't tell you why. They just send it back to you.
And you don't have any choice.
No, and I mean, of course, or you could, I guess, just publish it with just blank chapters, which would, from a publishing standpoint, probably not be so great. But they don't tell you why. So I had to guess and keep sending it back and guess and guess and guess. And it turned out, I figured it out.
They don't tell you?
No.
Wow.
And so I figured it out, though, after when I was realizing what was getting redacted and why, because I think I mentioned that very classified program. That is in there. But then there were other things that I was like, oh, this won't be a problem, that were completely redacted. So when I traveled overseas, I traveled in an alias, a full alias. So theoretically, I was never there. So the names of the countries and the identifying information is what was causing the entire chapter to be blacked out.
Wow.
Which is, I got smart to that after a while.
Okay.
And so by the 5th resubmit, my publisher was happy with the way that it was, and they decided to publish it the way that you see it now.
Did you have a different alias every time you traveled, or
No,
the same?
the same one. The
Okay.
same one.
So, and is that, I assume that most people don't assume a woman as a spy, or some member of or an FBI agent or a CIA agent.
Yes.
So does that give you an advantage?
I think it depended on where you were.
Okay.
If you're in a war zone, because I have to be kind of careful to talk around it, I think people pretty much knew what I was doing there. I wasn't military because I wasn't in a uniform. So, what else was I doing? Now, if I was in Europe or a country where I guess physically I blended in a lot more, yes. It was probably more difficult for people to determine what I was doing. But it kind of depended where I was.
So, and when you're over there, it's all work. There's
In the war zones, you get creative, right?
Okay.
With what you're doing. We had trailers. If anyone's seen the movie, I use this a lot because it's out there, is Zero Dark 30. If you see like the scene when they're, I think in Afghanistan, it looks very much like that. You're in these like double wide trailers, single wide trailers. And so we turned one into a gym. We turned another one into a sand pit for volleyball. You sort of get creative about things. We turned another one into a bar. Yes, it is all work because what else is there to do, unfortunately? When you're over in other places, it's not as difficult to maybe go out to eat by yourself or those kinds of things. You can do that, but not in war zones.
okay. And other countries that you were able to go to that weren't in a war zone, which ones did you like the best? What were some of your favorite things to see?
I can't say specifics because then it
Okay.
would, I'm sorry, one chapter got completely redacted because of a fountain.
Wow. That's incredible. So what if your daughter wanted to be and go into the FBI or the CIA? What would you tell
So
her?
that's a great question. And I thought about my parents, while I was writing this book. I have to tell her yes. My parents told me yes. So whether I want her to or I'm scared for her is sort of a whole nother story. But I don't I don't have a choice in the matter. My parents gave me that opportunity, and I'm sure we're worried, but I have to give my child that opportunity. That's not fair.
And hopefully the gender discrimination will improve and be gone by then.
Yes.
It sounds like we have some questions from the audience.
Yes, we do. So a couple of comments, actually. One of them is we do have a couple of people watching that have just bought your Audible.
Oh,
book.
thank you so much for your support.
So there you go. And then from our production crew, we're interested to know how far along your ABC series project is, and if you could choose who was going to play you, who would that be?
That's a good question. So the first part, it's tough for me to answer because there was a writer's strike and then we got into the quarantine. So I don't really know how far along it is. Once they sort of bought the rights to the book or to my life, not really that involved, if that makes any sense. So I would need to check back in with them and see how it's going. I know they're talking to different writers right now, so that's how far I guess we are in that. In terms of who would play me, I am a terrible person to answer that question, and that is because I really don't watch a lot of movies. I really don't know who I would want to play me. Do you have any ideas?
Oh, fair enough. I'll think about that.
Okay.
I'll give you some ideas.
Okay.
We do have one of our other members, her husband, says that he interviewed with the CIA in college during the Vietnam War, and the first thing in the interview was to sign a document that he had never talked to the CIA. So I don't know, maybe he's asking if there was any. Obviously, you're able to, get clearance to, to be able to write and release your book, but
Of course.
can you talk about maybe what that process is like? Or?
Yeah, like I said, so everything has to go through the Publications Review Board. So for me, most employees, I guess, contrary to pop culture, most employees are what we call overt employees and not covert employees. And that if I wanted to, I could tell someone I worked at the CIA. Now, I have some friends that are covert employees, which means they couldn't probably write a book at all. Meaning they could not say that they ever worked there. And so for me, I guess I'm lucky, and everyone else that's written a book is also lucky in that they can say that they work there. Now, like I said, all finished writing anything has to go through the Publications Review Board, and I respect my former employer and the employees that are still there enough to ensure that everything, I was very religious and very meticulous about making sure that everything went through them. I believe there have been a book or two that have been published that have not been cleared, and you can be sued and put in jail for that. One of my colleagues actually was for that, which was not a risk that I was willing to take. Also for me, I think what helped me was, and this is something I did that might seem a little, I guess, nerdy, I read every single book that had been written by a former CIA employee. And what I did is, when I submitted my manuscript, I put footnotes in there of anything that I knew might be sort of questionable, and I referenced it to a book that I knew had been cleared by the CIA.
That's what makes you a great professor.
Yes, a little bookish, I guess. And I referenced it to every book that had been cleared. And so really the CIA would have to then offer to me
Excellent.
a reason why. And so there was actually one chapter, the crash and bang chapter, which is the chapter of my time at the farm in the car, that they did actually black out completely. And you can appeal their decision. So I appealed that chapter, and I referenced the book yet again that I had referenced it to, and sure enough, they allowed the whole thing in with no redactions. And so I think doing that helped me tremendously.
So it pays to do your homework.
I guess it was very time consuming, but yes, it paid to do my homework, exactly.
So somebody commented that they think Scarlett Johansson would be
Oh,
the
that'd be
perfect
good.
person to play you.
That
in
would
the
be, I think
series.
she's fantastic,
Yeah.
so that would be great.
Yeah, I agree.
Scarlett Johansson, if you're listening, welcome to.
And someone else just commented that about how much of a culture change there's been in intelligence, and particularly the CIA, over the past couple of decades. Did you notice any of that? I mean, you were only there for 4 years, but did you notice any changes while you were there?
So I would say the biggest shift, and so yes, I was there for that period of time, but I was there in like a big period of time. September 11th, that was seismic, I guess. I don't know any other way to say that. And so I think I mentioned before that I was talking about the advent of centers. And I will say that changed completely. The CIA used to be very sort of linear and funnel-like in their thinking. If it occurred in Russia, it goes in the Russia department. If it occurred in Mexico, it goes in the Mexico department. And when I worked there is when centers really started taking off, like the Counterproliferation Center, Counter-Narcotics Center, and the whole idea of transnational issues, right? Things that occur across different geographic areas. That was a huge culture shift. And I think it's still around today, just, in people that I still talk to. And I'm actually happy. I think having that 360 view of an issue is really important. So
What makes an overt versus a covert employee?
it really depends. So like some secretaries are covert employees. It really just depends on who you're working for, what you're doing. Some logistics officers or human resource employees are covert employees. It's not what I think people expect it to be. So like, for example, the person that does our travel booking is a covert employee because they don't want that person maybe being kidnapped or whatever to give information about where CIA employees are going. So really for not reasons that I think people think.
Are there any shows or movies that you think are actually accurate?
I would say the only one that comes close is probably Zero Dark 30.
Wow.
That's it. Sorry, and especially at the FBI, Criminal Minds really gets under my skin because, no, it's nothing like that.
So what's really inaccurate about it?
So with Criminal Minds, there's a couple of things. Like, first of all, we don't travel in private Cessnas. I mean, that's your salary is funded by taxpayers, and I think taxpayers would be really upset to know that's how the money was being spent. Also, the idea of serial killers is actually not something that the FBI investigates a lot of the time. It's not what takes up the bulk of their investigation. And that's because if it's not crossing state lines, it's, depending on the crime, theoretically a federal crime. So a lot of times they're handled by either, state level police or local level police. So that I think is another kind of big misconception about the FBI.
So will you write another book?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know what it would be on, but I'm not gonna never say never. So we'll see.
How do you enjoy teaching?
I love teaching. I mean, that's definitely, I guess, has been my calling. I think the whole idea of service, right? I do feel like I'm serving, but just in this different way, and that I'm showing students different applications also of their degrees that I think they need.
Are you going to be, they are going to be live in the fall, right? At TCU?
I'm not certain. So we've been told to prepare for a couple different ways. Hybrid, which is partially online, partially in person, fully online, or fully in person. I don't know that they've made a final decision yet. I mean, that was my email as of yesterday afternoon, the last time I looked at it.
So will they expand your the course load that you're offering?
I don't know. As an adjunct right now, probably not for the first semester, but maybe as the second semester. I mean, I would love to do more. I love teaching. So, and especially criminal justice, particularly right now, I think is an important thing to be teaching. So I'm really excited about that. I would teach more if they asked me to, for sure.
Are there any particular degrees that you think would better prepare someone that wants to work for the FBI or the CIA?
So I think it depends. A lot of times people want to know a formula, right? They want to know, what can I do to get to this point? And I'm sorry to say I don't have that formula. Obviously, one of the best things to do is to go onto the CIA's website, and they do have, degrees in languages that they're looking for. So please forgive me, I've not gone on anytime soon, but I would highly encourage people to go on, see what it is they're looking for, and then, perhaps follow up with those majors. But in my experience and in my opinion, what helps the most is your decision-making process. That's really what was important. That's what I found.
Excellent. And how about languages?
I think right now their language needs are Arabic and Chinese, but I'm not 100% certain. You'd have to look at their website.
Okay. So what are you excited about now?
I'm excited about teaching next in the fall. I'm excited to see about where sort of my book takes me and the impact that I can have with it.
Fantastic. So what's next on your travel list?
On my travel list, nothing right now, unfortunately. I have a daughter. My husband is kind of has a backlog of patients right now, so unfortunately we're not going anywhere anytime soon. But if I do, it'd probably be to California to see my family.
That's where you're from?
Yes, yes.
And do you have any siblings?
I do. I have a brother, and he's in California as well.
Did he also go into law enforcement?
No, my brother is vice president of technology for an oil and gas company.
Awesome.
Completely different than I.
So what are you doing for fun right now?
For fun, I love to work out. That's probably my big physical outlet, I guess. Working out just, to me, makes everything better when you're stressed out. That came from the FBI 100% and just sort of stayed with me. My daughter, hang out with my daughter and my husband. That's really what I do.
That's great.
Pretty boring.
Well, very exciting. Are there any other courses that you're wanting to teach going forward?
I would love to teach a course on the Middle East. I think it's a very misunderstood area, and obviously having spent time there and meeting with people there, I would really love, that opportunity. But really, criminal justice as well, given my law enforcement, that really checked that box. But yes, I would love to teach a course on the Middle East.
What are some of the main areas that are misunderstood?
Of the Middle East?
Yes.
I think, and this is a new thing that I had added in my national security course, was the idea of domestic terrorism. I think we need to move away from the idea that all terrorists and all types of terrorism come from over there, if you will. That's a dangerous sort of narrative to always have. And so I would really love to see more of a focus. I think we need to monitor over there, obviously, that's my expertise, but we also need to think about things in the United States as well.
Would you go back to working for the FBI or CIA?
Yes, I would.
So that's possible?
Yes.
I didn't know, like, if, once you left, if you couldn't go back?
Oh, you can. I mean, people have. I don't know that I would right at this moment. My daughter's pretty young, but yes.
And are there any countries in particular that you think we should be more concerned about?
That's a great question. I'd say two. Iran and China are kind of my two targets. Is a terrible word to use, but those are the two sort of on my list of focus. Let's put that.
What are your concerns?
They're different. So with China economic espionage, like I said, I was working on one of the very early cases with that. And I think they're not necessarily here to, hack the Pentagon and destroy our infrastructure. That's really not what they're doing. But in my opinion, they're trying to steal trade secrets. And that costs companies millions, probably billions of dollars, not to mention taxpayer money as well. And they're really trying to, the U.S. is sort of the creative center, right, for the development of all of these things and all of the technologies. And China is sort of the mass producer of it. And so I think what they want is to steal the creativity and just mass produce it. That's what they're sort of looking to do. And so I think that's a huge problem. I think Iran is a problem simply because it's somewhat of a black hole. We don't have an embassy there. We don't have much of a open. So I'm kind of on the mindset, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. And, even back when I was working counterterrorism, they were holding terrorists and letting those terrorists go and not telling us. And, that's a huge problem as well. And the proxy wars that they're fighting all over Yemen, and Saudi Arabia is doing it too. And that's really destabilizing a lot of places in the world and making it a hotbed for the resurgence of terrorism. And that's a problem.
Wow. Exciting. Well, thank you so much. This has
Thank you
been
for
a delight
having
having you. We look forward to having you back and having you visit our club. You're going to be a hit. And so thank you again.
Thank you for having me, Happy.
And so check out our book at Interabang and Amazon. And hopefully we'll get to see your movie out soon. So is it going to be a movie or a TV series?
Right now it looks like a TV series, but it could change, I'm sure.
And you don't know like what kind of like whether it's going to be on an Amazon series or
I think they're looking at ABC.
ABC. Exciting. So next week's program is Keith Campbell. He's the managing editor of the Dallas Morning News. So we certainly have lots of questions for him. So you'll definitely not want to miss that. Join us next week. And without any further ado, let's do the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Stay safe. We look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great weekend.